Welcome to the Acid Trash Jamboree, a channel where I discuss and review all manner of cool music and films. As you've no doubt already noticed, this episode is given over to the first of my deep dives into the so-called private tapes of Manuel Göttsching, and several of the bands that he was involved with down the years, most notably Ashra Tempel, and the later incarnation, known simply as Ashra. Each of the 6 volumes of the private tapes came out in the mid-90s via the German imprint Manikin Records, with Japanese editions being co-handled by the Arcangelo label. Each pressing was limited to 1,000 copies, and whilst, as of 2025 at least, copies are readily available for sale, unfortunately they've jumped up drastically in price over the years, particularly since Göttsching's death in 2022. Now, despite being a fan of the man's work for something like a decade previously, the private tapes albums were never really on my radar until sometime in 2013 when, completely out of the blue, I had a dream about finding them in a shop. Of course, as soon as I woke up, obsessive creature that I am, I decided I needed them in my life. And yeah, it took a few months to track them down, but as it turned out, they were well worth the wait. So let's get stuck in. Okay, Volume 1 opens with the brief Bois de Soleil, a melancholic, free-floating affair with spare, bluesy electric guitar echoing over soft synth chords, very much in a mid-70s Floydian vein. This theme is reprised in a more expansive way towards the end of the CD as Bois de la Lune, in which Göttsching's guitar sounds altogether more distressed, drenched in a strange buzzing distortion and occasionally wandering off into atonality thanks to some heavy whammy bar abuse. As far as emotive, pentatonic blowouts go, whilst it's not quite up there with Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, Göttsching certainly touches on some of that Eddie Hazel magic. In between these, we get the main meat of Disc 1, 2 huge soundscapes which, between them, take up nearly an hour, though as far as the private tapes go, these are the first of many epics to come. Yeah, the near 30-minute Eloquentus Wiesel is a mostly electronic studio affair from 1979, beginning with cascades of Terry Riley-styled organ notes over a tense sequencer pattern. The soloing eventually abates, leaving the sequencer to modulate moodily for a while, Göttsching occasionally opening and closing the odd filter to alter the sounds a bit, but mostly he just keeps things bubbling away nicely. Whilst there are occasional subtle synth additions as the piece progresses, those used to the more restless, noodly style of most of the other keyboard wizards of the era may find Manuel's approach here a bit too spare and minimalistic. Eventually, though, he breaks out the SG and gets stuck in with some Echoplex soloing, building up a nice head of steam as dissonant synth chords rise in volume, dominating the mix, things then fading back into nothingness. Next, we jump back to 1974. Yeah, I should point out that, no doubt due to timing restraints, the private tape series isn't chronological in the slightest, so it does flit about quite a bit. The piece in question is the 25-minute Begleit Musik zu einem Hörspiel, which translates rather mundanely as incidental music for a radio play. The play in question was entitled De Vertreter, or The Agent. Its mysterious soundtrack, consisting of 5 movements, opening with spooked out, shimmering layers of glissando guitar, to which Göttsching adds delicately strummed chords and high seagull wails, again all very Floydian, bringing to mind the atmospheric middle section of the classic Echoes from a few years earlier. The second part lightens the mood somewhat, with a warm, modal guitar piece sounding like something from the first Neu album, until the key switches from major to minor, and darkness descends yet again, as Rosie, Göttsching's girlfriend at the time, swoops in with some thoroughly freaked out harp plucking. Part 3 is a piece for solo echo guitar. It's menacing, minimalist pulse, touching on the Batman riff for a time, until it's back to the freeform moodiness for part 4, with soft, spacey chordal swells eventually coalescing into the familiar heavenly sequence from Ashra Tempel's Schwingungan album. The soundtrack then concludes with a dreamy creepscape, as Göttsching's wordless falsetto voice soars over delicate drops of vibraphone, the piece sounding like it's being played inside some enormous ice cave. Closing the disc is Chicken Malady, a 10-minute jam credited to Steeplechase Blues Band, one of Göttsching's first groups. Recorded in 1970, it's hard to believe that just a year later, Manuel would be melting minds and speakers alike with the first Ashra Tempel LP. Whilst it's certainly not your standard 12-bar blues jam, with the instruments rarely playing in the same key as each other, and the whole thing structured more like a jazz piece. Altogether, it's a pretty tentative affair, with only the thunderous drum solo hinting at the free rock storm that was fast approaching on the horizon. Volume 2 of the private tapes opens with a solo rendition of the soon-to-be Ashra classic, Deep Distance, recorded live at the Bataclan in Paris at the end of 1976. This take is around 4 times longer than the rather concise studio version from New Age of Earth, with a long, chilled-out intro opening out into blissful fuzz guitar soloing and cosmic organ swells, the propulsive backing rhythms becoming ever more phased out and trippy before the piece simmers back down. The following track, Shuttlecock, also taped at the Bataclan show, is again a fair bit longer than the studio version that cropped up on the Blackouts LP a couple of years later. Here, the sequencer pulses away on a single moody minor chord, as MG solos cleanly and serenely through his echo unit, occasionally sounding like Jerry Garcia or John Cipollina lost in a hall of mirrors. Eventually, Manuel effects his guitar to sound more like a synth, before things melt subliminally into more of that Terry Riley-styled organ minimalism, as wisps of white noise rise like plumes of electronic smoke in the background, the performance ending nicely with hovering electronic drones. Track 3, Wall of Sound, is another studio outtake from 1979, which, to my ears at least, brings to mind an alternate fantasy version of the German supergroup Harmonia, in which MG took over the axe duties from Michael Rother. Yeah, expect plenty of tasty, multi-layered and FX-heavy soloing over a mellow, playful electronic backing, which really does sound like it could have been cooked up by Mobius and Rodelius in their legendary forced home studio. Aside from a brief interview clip tagged onto the end, Volume 2 is rounded off by a near 25-minute excerpt of vintage 1971 Ashra Tempel live jamming. Yeah, entitled Soirée Académique, this opens with a lengthy section of solo echo guitar, with MG hammering out wave after spacey wave of minor key chord action, until the powerhouse rhythm section of Hartmut Enker and Klaus Schulze slide in behind him and quickly start brewing up a psychedelic storm. That said, any hopes of this turning out to be the most face-melting modal freak-out this side of Amboss from their debut LP are quickly dashed by another solo, this time from Schulze, who pummels 10 bells out of his drum kit for what seems like an eternity. Unfortunately, by the time Göttsching and Enker join back in, we start to hear evidence of damage to the master tape, at which point everything fades out. I can only imagine that this piece ran for at least another 15 or 20 minutes, no doubt reaching multiple peaks of musical ecstasy along the way. But yeah, unfortunately, due to these technical gremlins, we'll never get to hear what happened next. All's not lost though, as there are several more recordings from the first lineup of Ashra Tempel scattered about the private tape series, as we'll get onto in due course. But yeah, that's it for now. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about this era of European psychedelic and progressive music, then feel free to explore the archive, where you'll find all sorts of other videos on the subject. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you again soon on the Acid Trash Jamboree.